This video is from another terrific day sailing during our stay by Chichester Harbour a few weeks ago, in which we rode the top of the tide from the beach at Cobnor up to Dell Quay and back in glorious sunshine and with plenty of breeze. However, a sub-story of the day is my increasing irritation with the outboard motor, which, somewhat paradoxically, eventually leads me to appreciate a new reason to be glad that I replaced Tarka's petrol outboard with an electric one. The best place to start that part of the story is 2 days earlier, at the end of our trip to Cobnor Marina, which featured in the last video. After dropping the rest of the crew off at the beach, I set out again to pick up the buoy which I had left just off the beach, attached to Tarka's second anchor. Approaching the buoy, I dropped the tiller for a moment to furl the jib, but when I pick the tiller up again, I find that I can't turn tightly enough to get to the buoy. So I have to head out into the channel to let the tide take me back upwind to make another approach. Why couldn't I turn tightly enough? Well, that was mostly because when Tarka's outboard is mounted, and especially when the prop is raised, the shaft restricts Tarka's rudder movement and her turning circle to port is significantly increased. Most of the time it doesn't matter too much, but sometimes I do feel it would be nice to have Tarka's full manoeuvrability. I make sure that no tight turns are required for my second attempt. On the morning of our trip to Dell Quay, the outboard actually did a little bit of work to bring Tarka in from the anchorage to the beach at Cobnor. There, it wasn't long before provisions and crew were aboard and we were able to set sail. Once we had a bit of room from the moored boats, my attention turned back to the engine. I wanted to try sailing with the engine down. This should improve Tarka's range of rudder movement and therefore her manoeuvrability, but as soon as the engine was down, a new problem presented itself. The flow of water set the prop spinning, and the engine didn't seem to like this while it was switched off, and started beeping at us. Switching the engine on again and leaving it in neutral stopped the beeping, but this wasn't a very satisfying solution. I tried to put it to the back of my mind, as we were now leaving the Bosom Channel and could bear away to be carried by the wind and tide past Itchenor and on up the Chichester Channel towards Dell Quay. It was great sailing with always plenty to look at. The game was to see who could spot the silliest boat name. In the interest of not causing offence in case the owner of that boat ever watches this video, I won't say which boat won. But I should say there's hopefully no reason for offence anyway, because we are very appreciative of all the owners who give their boats original and amusing names. I feel like we might have played it a bit safe with Tarka. It was a lovely sail, but I couldn't get the outboard motor completely out of my mind. It's not just Tarka's manoeuvrability that's affected by having the outboard mounted, it's also her speed. Whether the outboard is lowered or raised, it's impossible to lift it completely out of the water unless I cut an even bigger hole in Tarka's transom. On this trip up to Dell Quay, a GP14 came racing up from a long way behind us and reached Dell Quay comfortably before us. You can see it here just making its way up to the quay. A GP14 is probably going to be faster than Tarka the majority of the time, but I couldn't help thinking it shouldn't have been that much faster, and maybe that prop dragging through the water was slowing us down even more than I realised. It was impossible not to think about how much better a sailing boat Tarka is without the outboard attached. The final straw came when we tried to pick up a mooring buoy for lunch. And yes, like the other day, I should have made a longer, straighter, more controlled approach, but without the outboard inhibiting the rudder once again, we might have made it. I can't show you our second attempt because by this point I was so cross with the outboard that I turned the GoPro off. We picked the story up again after lunch. The tide has turned and is now helping us back down the channel, and can you spot the other difference? Yes, the sun's gone in, but also the outboard has gone. Don't worry, I haven't lobbed it over the side. But I did think that with the prospect of having to sail upwind into a stiff breeze and with a strong current along a river that's tightly packed with moored yachts, it would be good to have the full use of Tarka's rudder, and it was time to try an idea I had been considering for a while: sailing with Tarka's engine removed from its well and stowed away. The outboard is slung from a grey rope under the bench under the port side. You can just about see the black bulb of the electric motor at the bottom of the picture, and the battery is in a locker under the foredeck. This is one of the great advantages of an electric motor that I had not really considered until after I'd bought one. They are so much better than petrol ones when they are not in use. During our week in the Lake District, I took the outboard off after our first sail down from Coniston Slipway to our jetty, initially just for security overnight, but having taken it off, we thought life might be simpler and more fun without it, and it didn't go back on again for the rest of the week. It lived in the cottage under one of the beds. I could never have done that with a petrol outboard, too heavy and unwieldy for one thing, and far too messy. But whilst it's easy enough to manage without an outboard in the Lake District, where if you don't have enough wind for sailing you can always row, on tidal waters, for family sailing with young kids, I'd rather have a motor on board. But it doesn't have to be mounted. The cleanliness and slim profile of an electric outboard makes it far easier to stow than a petrol one would be, and you can enjoy the peace of mind of having an alternative means of propulsion up your sleeve, but without, in a boat like Tarka, severely compromising her sailing qualities. I think that under the bench is where our motor might spend the majority of its time on board Tarka from now on. As you can see, conditions are starting to become quite lively, but now unhindered by her outboard, Tarka seems to be revelling in them. Apart from stowing the outboard, there have been a couple of other little tweaks and discoveries this summer which have made Tarka much more pleasant to sail upwind, but I will save those for another video. For now, all I will say is that I really enjoyed this sail. The smooth motion of Tarka cutting through the chop in the more exposed bits, and the challenge of trying to pick the best route through the moorings in the narrower reaches of the channel. All the time, the feeling that I'm slowly starting to understand how to get the best out of this boat, plus seeing how much the kids enjoy her, whether they are up on deck getting involved in the sailing or retreating into their cosy space under the foredeck, allowed an increasing sense that Tarka is well on her way to being everything I hoped she would be. The very best bit of the day came right at the end. When we bore away to sail on a broad reach the last few hundred yards up the bosom channel to the beach at Cobnor, for a moment or two it felt like Tarka might be on the point of rising up onto the plain. She didn't, quite, but I think it was the fastest she's sailed with us so far, and it was a thrilling finish to our time on Chichester Harbour.